Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight we're going to be joined by Mia Mason and Mr. Jacob Bennett to do a discussion about education. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll address them as they come in. Before we get into introductions, I wanted to start off with a focusing activity to get everybody's mind in the right frame for the town hall tonight. So please post your answers to the following question in the chat box or in the comments. What is the biggest issue in education today? So whatever you think the biggest issue in education is today, go ahead and respond. And while those answers are coming in, I'd like to introduce our guests. So first I'll start off by introducing Mr. Jacob Bennett. He's a fifth year of teaching kindergarten. He decided to become a teacher on his last day of fifth grade as he sat on the bus leaving school. He was overwhelmed with emotion and thought about all the ways that teachers and administrators had supported his brother and himself in a really hard decision in his life as his mom struggled with mental illness. It was there on that bus that he reflected in their kindness and decided that it would be for the kids one day what they had been for him. Next we have Mia Mason. She's a 20-year veteran who served in the Army, Navy, and DC National Guard. She's running for Congress in Maryland's 1st District to restore equity and equality back within our communities. So, I wanted to go ahead and turn the question over to you guys. Mia, if you could kick us off, what do you think is the biggest issue in education right now?
Well, the biggest education right now is basically the online learning. I think that's one of the biggest struggles that everybody is facing right now. You know, most people don't try to attend online learning until they're in college because we understand that, you know, you're full-time and you need to, you know, do that extra class. So you try an online class and then you realize how easy it is. Or if you have a busy life, you do an online college class. Now we have everybody from the time that they're the age of 6 all the way to the time that they're 18, basically trying to do 3 hours straight of, you know, any type of elementary work, any type of junior or high school work, all online. And then keep their attention, keep them immersed in what we're doing. And then, of course, because they don't have good internet, you know, Comcast and Cox, they love to do their maintenance at 11, noon, and 1 o'clock, right in the middle of teaching. So those sometimes are the biggest hurdles teachers and students are facing right now. And then when everybody's online, let's say you have a large family of trying to learn, and they're all on their devices, and then that just slows your internet down even further, and then you can't hear, you can't see, because things are getting jarbled, which ruins the immersion and the teaching and the quality of education. So, you know, providing an investment into our future for our children, it starts with the parents and starts with our school systems and starts at the federal government as well. So we're looking forward to making a lot of changes to help what we've pretty much kind of dumped onto parents and their children because of this pandemic. And it's sad to hear that we may be going into a second wave, and knock on wood, better not come to Maryland.
Absolutely, Mia. I wanted to go ahead and turn that same question over to Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I think currently the biggest issue in education right now is workload, not just for teachers, but I also think for children and families alike. And I think that stress of workload right now, you know, like in Harford County, the average teacher is working 65 hours a week right now, which is 25 unpaid hours a week, or $1,000 a paycheck, or 100 hours a month that they're not with family, which is huge. But what that speaks to is the erosion of the educational infrastructure in our country. You know, on a national scale, it's cutting Title I funding 4 years in a row. On a state level, it's the anti-teacher rhetoric that comes from Andy Harris or Larry Hogan. And then on a local level, you know, year after year, the portion of our county's budget that goes to education is cut. And all that put together has led to a situation where we can't handle emergencies because we can barely handle normalcy. And that leads to an increase of workload for everyone to make up the slack from the lack of infrastructure.
Absolutely. Kind of what you touched on, talking about that state and federal level, I wanted to go ahead and pose the first question, which is, what can be done on a federal level to help our teachers? Mr. Bennett, you can go ahead and continue on.
I think making sure that we stop giving money towards school choice and that money is relocated back to Title I funding. I'm a big proponent for the proposal to triple Title I funding nationally. It's huge. That does so much for schools and kind of being able to help schools that need the money most get the money. And I also think on a state level, advocating for and pushing for the Maryland Blueprint and making sure that veto is overridden so that we get the additional funding, that we can get universal pre-K, that we can get pre-K for 3-year-olds, all those things that are just common sense practices. And that starts with advocacy. Right now we have someone in Congress who's actively speaking anti-teacher rhetoric. And it just doesn't work for us. It cuts us at the knees.
Absolutely, especially with you guys going above and beyond right now, as you said, doing more than you guys already do. Mia, I wanted to pose the same question to you. What do you think can be done on the federal level to help our teachers?
Well, at a federal level for our teachers, it's about making sure that they actually have a salary that goes make up for those missed hours with their family. Like he talked about the universal pre-kindergarten. It's actually a bill. It's HR 4213. It's been introduced and we're trying to get it through, but where is it going? When we were lobbying for the Kerwin Commission, one of the things I asked several representatives was like, hey, did you ask your congressman or state senator for funding for this? And they were like, no. I was like, well, we know who sounds like that. It's Andy Harris. And him with Betsy DeVos, where they're like completely into religious schools. And, you pay for school from the time that, you were born to the time that you go to college. So we can't have that. And we've seen so many vouchers get doubled for private schools. And it's like, no, we should be able to fully fund our preschools, even if it means police reform. Because honestly, we need to be able to take that budget from the police and provide it back to our teachers, where our children are needed. So that's where we need to be able to get the money and put it back into our communities. So it's about providing our opinion to the state legislators, and if need be, tell them that, hey, ask. We can work to incorporate it in there with the Treasury and the Department of Education and see what we can do for Maryland to keep us in the top 10. We shouldn't be 13. We used to be like 4, 5, and 6, and now it's just slipped away. And I'm pretty sure next year we're going to be like 25 or something, because out of 50 states, that's not good. Maryland's always been in the top 10.
Absolutely. And I think you also touched on another really good point, Mia, which is providing our teachers the salaries that they deserve. And I know that you're a big proponent of UBI for teachers. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, it's about making sure that they aren't relying on their income to buy teacher supplies and everything else. So this is a subsidy to make sure that they're able to get paid for those missing hours with their family. We want to be able to do the same things for the farmers whenever a drought or anything else happens. So providing a universal basic income for those who qualify, means that, hey, look, if you lose your job in between, you substituting or you teaching because of health emergencies, you can still have health insurance and you can still have an income while you're away without having to rely on FMLA and all the other PTOs. And we can go down that rabbit hole, but let's stop.
Absolutely. And Mr. Bennett, have you heard of universal basic income for teachers before, and what is your take on it?
I've heard a lot of conversation about UBI, and I think it's just in general a good practice in order to help people be able to do what they desire with life without the fear of what could happen. Right now, one of the biggest things that cuts all working class at the knees is the fear of, if they take direct action, losing their job, losing their health care. And when you take away that fear, it invigorates all workers to be able to stand up for themselves and to have a more equal and fair say within the marketplace. So I'm all for that because I think that leads to workers' rights.
Absolutely. Now I wanted to go on to more of a current issue, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. We wouldn't be able to talk about education without talking about how this has impacted education. From a teacher's perspective, just go ahead and kind of tell us what your experience is and how COVID-19 has impacted the way that you teach.
I teach kindergarten, so I teach, 5-year-olds who one of the biggest, direct issues are illiterate at the start of the year. They can't read. So when you can't read, how do you navigate tech interfaces that are designed for those who can? And so that's a big hurdle right off the bat. But there's been good pieces and there's been bad, being able to find how to keep the magic of being 5 online has been huge. Families have been great, so supportive. But again, it's just the toughest piece of being asked to reinvent how education works. I'm sitting in what used to be a spare bedroom in our house that is now a mock classroom that I built, spent money on, used for a month, and then they said, you're going back to school now because they're rescinding the plan to keep us at home till January. And I think that's just been one of the toughest pieces of it is plans are constantly changing. Larry Hogan came out like a week before school started and said, actually, I don't like anyone's plan. I want everyone to go back. And if you go back, we'll give you $5 or whatever it was. And they forced the state superintendent, sat down with all the county superintendents and said, hey, you better make a go back to school plan right now, and kind of put us in this predicament that we're in. So it's been hard, but it's also been good. My kids have done awesome. They're really adjusting it to it well. They're having fun. They got to watch me get slimed today because they had earned it. And it's just like any other school year. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of tough, but.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your story and how the pandemic has impacted you. And I'm sure there's many, many other stories from teachers all over the country. Mia, how do you think COVID has impacted education as we know it right now?
I think it's upset a lot of folks, including the teachers. It's upset the political leaders having to make calls like what you've seen, and the flip-flop and changing because of the rising COVID cases, or a kid comes in who has COVID, and then everybody has to quarantine, then go home. And then if your classes are switching between everything, it's really hard to do. And then contact trace when kids are bullying each other on why they're wearing a mask. And this pandemic is teaching us a lot, but it's still not stopping some of the root causes, like what we heard from kids shouldn't show up illiterate. That is on the parents. Teacher probably shouldn't have to go the extra mile for that. But, going back and forth between the schools and everything else is a hardship. It's put a Dorious toll on there. So I am proud of you and your resiliency to be able to teach kids and then earn yourself to get slimed like Nickelodeon. And then, of course, getting the kids to be immersive with you in the environment that we're given in order to teach them. Most of the times when we're older adults, we go to YouTube, we go to Google, we try to learn something quick and fast by figuring it out from Google. So maybe our kids are learning the same way with the help of us teachers, parents, and adults, because that's how we learned before we had public libraries and Dewey Decimal Systems and everything else, because even the libraries are closed and they've slowly reopened. But it's just one of those things that have really impacted everybody in their education. And then, of course, when you mix that in with COVID and parents staying at home and having to work from home, you got to be able to spend that time with each kid and get them plugged in and check on them like every half hour to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, on top of you working from home. And sometimes even the parents have to work extended hours just like the teachers. So it's a really, really big impact on all levels. And we are glad to be united to be able to work through this together, and we look forward to continuing to help and get kids back in school. But we need to make sure that people wear their masks, their kids wear their masks, and understand the reality of it. I was listening to the radio today, and they were talking about like how an entire family out of 9, only 2 survive. You know, the dad and the younger kid. So it makes a big difference when you see the impact of COVID firsthand versus, you know, having to see it on a recurring basis and who may survive and who may not. So this has really impacted everybody, not only at work, public transit, but also getting them to school and having them stay in school.
You're right, Mia. And I think that you also touched on a very important aspect, which is access to education. I know in your district, access to broadband internet is, you know, pretty rare to have affordable and reliable access. Can you talk a little bit more about how that impacts education in your district?
Well, it's where basically the superintendents and the teachers and the city councils have gotten together to provide access wireless hotspots. They had to do this in Kent, Queens Anne, Caroline, areas where just internet wasn't available unless you went to McDonald's and Taco Bell or whatever, because that's what was available. And they were able to then set up trailers for the students to come to be able to use access to the internet. But once you had so many people on it, it was just as slow as dial-up. So, you know, to be able to provide something that's affordable to everyone by giving them a device that actually has Wi-Fi and cell signal, that's the big difference. You can give somebody a device with Wi-Fi, but they might still not have internet when they get home, because right now they're choosing between their groceries, medicines, finding a job or keeping their job, and then providing food on the table. So this is super important, and I'll tell you this, TV gets cut, internet gets cut, cell phones get cut. So everything goes back to snail mail, and the kids are left out. So we need to be able to make sure that, you know, we support the superintendents, support the school systems, and provide at a state level. That's not my job, but on the congressional level, we can probably work together and provide opinions and find out what type of support we can get from the Department of Education.
You're right. Absolutely. And Mr. Bennett, can you speak a little bit more about, have you had any technological issues with your classroom or access to internet with your students?
Oh, for sure. And not even just for at home, but like at the school itself, you know, our broadband is not set up for a school full of people to be live streaming at once, you know, because that's not what an elementary school does. So, you know, a lot of times I look like a PlayStation 1 game when I'm on live stream and kids hold up their work, and I'm like, I'm just going to pretend this is correct because I have no clue what you're holding because I can't see it. But to speak to something Mia was just touching on that I think is a really good point, a lot of our, you know, I work at a Title I school, and a lot of our families are struggling right now financially. And I'm very sympathetic to their need for their child to be back in a building right now, because they have no choice but to work, and they don't have jobs that allow them to work from home, because you can't work at a grocery store from home, or you can't work at a hotel from home. And so, but my frustration is with those in Congress who haven't passed more financial aid so families could make the choice to stay at home and to be safe, because they were put in a position where they could not stay at home with their child. You know, that's something that Andy Harris has fought very much so against, to get any more coronavirus aid to families, which puts us in a bad position, because then, you know, school systems have to lift up the slack of that lack of care given by other federal employees.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you, because, you know, when we're speaking about Representative Harris, he's voted against the Child Care Act, he's voted against the HEROES Act, and that would have really helped out a lot of people, especially to, you know, provide aid to the state to make this stuff happen for us. But unfortunately, it didn't. And it's been stalled even by the president himself. So now we're just kicking the can down another 6 months, because they say magically this will go away as we're looking at a second wave, and it just doesn't make sense. So you know, if we're elected, I'm sorry, but we probably won't be able to help you till March at the earliest to make sure it gets down to your level, which may be too late. But with, you know, Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris, maybe we can actually, after the election, kind of push this through and then force the hand of Donald Trump to actually sign it so that we can get it in sooner. But we don't even know if he's going to allow us to have a transition of power. So we'll see what happens and what we can do to help our communities, especially because we know who has voted no against us and who is going to come into office and vote yes for our communities.
That's right, Mia. And, you know, until March comes or that time comes when the aid can finally get to the people who need it, what can we do in that meantime to support teachers? Mr. Bennett, did you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, I think the biggest way you can support teachers, your school system, your school, the people who work with your children is to know the local politics of your area. Like, so many people don't even know who their county council representative is, or who their county executive is, or what their stance is on school funding, or what's the trend of school funding in their area. And, you know, a lot of counties in Maryland struggle with a constant fight for funding. And just to know the names and to know how they vote and to be active and saying, I always tell people, like, let education funding be the canary in the coal mine for you. Like, how someone votes on education funding tells you everything you need to know about how they see government in supporting others. And it also tells you everything you need to know about workers' rights. It tells you everything you need to know about how they are as regards to taking care of those in need, about economic justice, about racial justice. Everything is shown through how they support school funding. So know your local officials, know your state officials, know your federal officials, and know what they think about taking care of kids. And then make sure other people know as well and be an advocate.
You're right, absolutely. Mia, how do you think we can support teachers until we get them that aid that they need?
Well, Jacob provided an excellent answer. The only thing I can kind of caveat and add on to it is think about our nonprofit organizations out there designed to help our communities in their time of need. I mean, some organizations, speakers, some buy headphones, some buy a lot of things. And check out our previous videos where we've talked about this at me.com and just understand that we're here to support our community. This is why we brought some of the organizations on to help our community get through this gap that is happening right now with this continued pandemic. So, you know, knowing who's local to be able to help you, if it's across a church or somebody, it's really going to help everybody, especially when you as a teacher have the resources to say, hey, I know your parents are going through something, but here's what we can do for you. I think that would really help a child, because sometimes they're just ashamed. You know, I remember being a small kid and only wearing a hoodie for like the whole year because it was probably the best shirt I had.
All right, Mia. I think that I know that we have worked with Alice's kids before, and they do something along those lines, as well as some other really good organizations out there. I wanted to go ahead and give you guys both the opportunity to make any closing remarks that you wanted about education or the current COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, I think we still may have a little bit of time to talk about, talk about our here, but our college education. Many of us still have student loan debt, and we need to be able to find a way to provide forgiveness to that, especially for private student loans, including those of the federal. And right now, there's so much, like, unbelievable red tape. I mean, like, what was the quote? I think it was like 80-90% of everybody that even applied was denied on the first time. It was very disheartening to see the student loan forgiveness program was just simply abused unless you knew what Betsy did personally. But we need to be able to help this. I know it's $1.5 trillion, but when you actually look at the average for student loan debt and what they paid versus what they actually are asking to forgiveness is normally 50-50, between $20,000 and $30,000 of what they have left to pay. So let's get them into a home. Let's get our economy back rolling. Let's forgive some student loans so that we can actually have families with assets instead of debt, so that we can help our economy with, buying homes, buying cars, etc., getting the manufacturing process started again. Would really help a lot of people with their student education debt. They're busting their butt 2 to 3 jobs in order to pay off these student loans, and all they're looking for is a down or a house, and they can actually succeed. So let's help our economy, help our students, help our teachers, regardless of what they're going through, because right now the entire country is going through a hardship. I think that's a qualifying circumstance for student loan forgiveness. I survived 2020.
Yes, I agree with you, Mia, especially as someone who's finishing up a second degree. I know a thing or two about student loan debt, and I'm completely on board with your plan. I wanted to turn it over to Mr. Bennett to see if he has anything to say about student loan forgiveness.
My wife and I are in a unique position because we were able to successfully pay off $60,000 of student loans for her that she had from going to college. But even with that said, I think a lot of people, when they pay off their loans, go, well, I paid off my loans. Other people should have to do that. I think it's important to remember that the cost of college is an example of systemic racism. It is in place as a gatekeeping method to keep people out of college, people from poverty, people of color who can't afford college, to keep them from ever going. And that it's so important that we remove that barrier to get closer to real justice, because as long as we require a college degree for high paying jobs and we make it so expensive to get that degree, we're going to keep white supremacy in place as a nation. And it's important that we take that step away. And the first step we can do that is to forgive the loans that do exist, and then push for loans to no longer have to exist through free college.
I would absolutely love to see that. Oh, go ahead, Mia.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I was talking to a young woman who was in college, and she said that she was a junior, but it was like her 4th year, and I'm like, wait a minute, are you pulling a Van Wilder? And I was like, you're getting a bachelor's and it takes 7 years. And I remember having to go through the same thing, and it was like, God knows, forever. You thought you were never going to get done, and then as soon as you got near the end, they were like, oh, by the way, we've changed the entire degree platform and you need to do 2 more of this, and it's 8 credit hours. And then you're like, how can I afford that? So we need to be able to make sure that, we kind of standardize everything and make sure that it makes sense. Because, what should be 4 years in college should be 4 years in college, especially if you aren't changing the degree. I know master's is normally 7 to 8, but seriously, that's a lot of time and a huge investment. And as you said, you create it very well. Systemic racism, especially when people are fighting for grants and scholarships. Most of the time they don't even know what's available to them, and we need to be able to, not only like for us veterans, to make sure that that is something provided, but for our high school students, because the thing is they should be looking at this in junior high. And I know it's a big burden on student counselors, but does the school even have a guidance counselor? Do they have more resource officers than they do guidance counselors? And how are they actually helping everyone with equity and equality to get them into college if that's something they want to do, or end up like me where parents were pulled a fast one on me and say, go join the military? So we need to be able to make that something that is standard for the entire nation.
Mm-hmm.
You're right, Mia, absolutely. Did you guys have any other remarks that you wanted to make regarding education?
I don't think so. Jacob, how can people reach out to you if you want to be able to help others?
You can reach out to me. I'm really not on much social media besides Facebook, but my name's on the screen, so that's easy to find me there. And if you're not going to reach out to me, I would really just recommend reaching out to your local school board, speaking up for teachers, speaking up to their workload, asking that they are given assistance, asking that their lives and their health are kept in mind. And just to be that advocate for teachers. You know, all too often teachers are scared to speak up. They're often taught that they're supposed to be apolitical. And so being their voice when they're too scared to be their own is very important.
Awesome. Well, thank you for speaking with us. And, you know, we're speaking to everybody, regardless if they're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. We want to make sure that education is provided so that we can actually work across the aisles. So with that, Lauren, close us out.
That's all we have for tonight, folks. I wanted to thank Mia and also Mr. Bennett for this discussion tonight. Everyone, make sure you stay safe and wear your mask.
All right. Good night and goodbye.
Bye.
Good night.